Have you seen Solaris? It's a sci-fi romance mystery remake about a troubled psychologist sent to investigate the crew of an isolated space station orbiting a bizarre planet. The film begins with Chris Kelvin sitting on his bed where he can hear a woman's voice saying she loves him so much and asking if he still loves her. We then see Chris go to work, meet with patients and book appointments before heading home. While cooking dinner, he accidentally cuts his finger. There's a knock on his door where two men have brought him a video message from Jabarian who asks for him to come to Solaris. He tells Chris that his crew can't explain what is happening to them, but also don't want to leave, so they need his help. The men who brought the message explain that they have lost contact with the security force they sent in, and that the crew have turned off the onboard AI system. Chris travels through space and arrives at Solaris. Once on board, he notices there is blood on the floor and smeared on the walls. He finds a bloody surgical glove in the medical bay. He then finds two body bags, one of them containing Jabarian. He continues down a corridor to hear some screaming, cheering, and finally some music. He follows the sounds and finds Snow in front of his computer, who gets up, struggles for a second to remember his name, and greets him. Chris asks about the blood. Snow tells him that the security forces showed up and Qatar tried to flee but was shot by them, and Jabarian committed suicide. The third person, Reese, has somehow disappeared and isn't on the ship. The fourth, Dr. Gordon, has locked herself in her room. Chris asks Snow what is happening. Snow answers he could tell him, but he doesn't know if that is really what is happening. Chris goes to speak to Dr. Gordon to try and find out what is happening, and she makes him promise not to try to get in her room. She tells him there is no point in discussing it until it starts to happen to him. Chris then wanders through the ship and sees a little boy and tries to give a chase, but he disappears. He goes to Snow and asks him about the little boy. Snow replies that's Jabarian's son, Michael. Chris doesn't understand how that is possible and asks to do a formal interview with Snow and Dr. Gordon. Snow agrees and advises Chris to lock his doors when he sleeps. During the interview, Dr. Gordon explains she was sent to survey Solaris, but then this shit started happening. She reveals she's experiencing depression, hypomania, insomnia, agoraphobia, OCD, and so on. Chris replies that it's not unusual under these circumstances. Snow tells Chris that he would kill to go back home, but Gordon won't. Later on, Chris unpacks and listens to Jabarian's video log and goes to sleep. We see strange blue waves emitting from Solaris. Chris starts to dream of flashback, and we see a woman sitting across from him on a bus, holding a doorknob. He wanders into a bar where she is sitting and sees Jabarian holding his son and waving him over. Jabarian tells Chris that Solaris is reacting, like it knows it is being observed. Jabarian notices Chris isn't paying attention and tells him to go to the woman, and that her name is Rhea. They flirt and she ends up following Chris home. Chris' eyes open, but he continues to dream. The pair have sex in his bedroom, but strangely, on the space station too. Next, Chris is woken up by hands stroking his neck and chest. He turns in surprise to see Rhea is lying next to him. He freaks out, takes a deep breath, and confirms with himself that he is awake. He starts to question Rhea, who answers him and asks if he still loves her. Chris then says he has to check on the crew, and Rhea screams no, "Don't leave me," but she can't say why. Chris leads Rhea into an escape pod, closes her in, and launches it. He turns away and tears of guilt builds up in his eyes. Snow comes to Chris' room and Snows tells him that his visitor was his brother, but he has stopped appearing. Chris reveals that Rhea was his dead wife and asks if she will come back. Snow asks him if he wants her to. The next night, Chris barricades his door and starts to dream about Rhea again. They wander around talking about getting married and discuss poems in a bookstore. He's woken up again by Rhea's touch. She tells him that she doesn't remember anything, just him, and asks if she has been ill. He replies, sort of. Chris works on his computer. Rhea stares out of Solaris and starts to have a flashback of when she had a positive result on a pregnancy test. She then remembers a time when she was in a bad mental state and had to go out to dinner with Chris and Jabarian's family, where they discuss how God is a human creation. Rhea then expresses her confusion and fear to Chris, as she has memories but can't remember experiencing it. He assures her that she is safe. Chris talks to Snow and tells him that the new visitor Rhea can never know anything about the first Rhea he sent away in the escape pod. Snow wonders if these visitors can get pregnant and suggests that another female would get along with Dr. Gordon and improve the dynamic of the group. Meanwhile, Rhea has another flashback of how furious Chris became when he found out she secretly got an abortion. Chris leaves and Rhea overdoses on sleeping pills. Back on the station, Chris tells Rhea that he came back for her that day. The group have a meeting, trying to understand the visitors. Chris suggests they take the findings of their experiments back to Earth. Dr. Gordon is worried that this phenomenon will follow them back to Earth. They start to argue, and Chris says they can't stop him from taking Rhea back. Dr. Gordon asks him if he wants to pick up the other one on the way. Rhea starts to ask what they are talking about, so Chris starts to explain what he did, and she starts to cry and walks away. Dr. Gordon tells Chris that it's a mistake to become emotionally engaged with Rhea, as he is being manipulated. His mind provides the formula, and that Rhea is not human. Chris questions Dr. Gordon about her visitor, but she doesn't answer, and says their situation is beyond morality, adding that Rhea is seducing him all over again. She leaves after saying they are not taking her back with them. Later that night, Chris wakes up to see a silhouette of Jabarian sitting in front of him, who asks him to leave the light off. Chris says that he isn't Jabarian. Jabarian replies that maybe Chris is the puppet thinking he is human. Chris asks what Solaris wants. Jabarian says that if he thinks there is a solution, then he needs to leave. Otherwise, he will die here. Chris wakes up again and calls for Rhea. He goes to look for her and finds that she has killed herself by consuming liquid oxygen. Chris takes her to a bed and calls for Dr. Gordon. Suddenly, Rhea resurrects, convulses, and her wounds heal. Dr. Gordon shows Chris a laser she used on her visitor, which made them disappear. Chris says he won't let her do it. Rhea argues that she came from his memory, not from who she actually is. She isn't whole, and predetermined to commit suicide. Chris disagrees, thinks that they can choose differently, and that this is his chance to undo his mistake. She asks if she is really Rhea. They embrace on the bed, and Chris says all he sees is her. Rhea asks again to be vaporized, as they can't have a life on Earth together, but Chris refuses. She doesn't want him to be trapped here, but he says what he has here is enough for him. Rhea asks him to rest, otherwise he will become ill. Chris sleeps, but then hears Rhea whispering about being vaporized to Jabarian's son, and then dreams of different memories of Rhea. He has a flashback of the day he returned to find that Rhea has committed suicide, and then wakes up. He sees Rhea on his monitor, asking him not to blame Dr. Gordon, as she begged her to do it. She says she knows that she isn't Rhea, but she also knows that Chris loved her, and she loves him. Chris rushes over to the lab and shouts at Dr. Gordon, who tells him it was instantaneous, and because it wasn't human. Dr. Gordon then says she is putting the AI back online, so they can go home. Chris then notices there is blood on one of the ceiling panels and calls for Dr. Gordon. They find Snow's body inside. They meet with Snow, and we find out that he is the visitor, and that he killed the original Snow because he attacked him. Dr. Gordon suggests they use the laser on him. Snow says they don't have time, because the last time they used the laser, it drained the field cells and Solaris started growing in mass exponentially. Snow informs them that they are being pulled in by Solaris's gravity and suggests they leave. Chris and Dr. Gordon suit up and prepare to leave. Chris stares out of the cockpit window of his escape pod. Back on Earth, Chris feels disconnected from the world and has no sense of time. He readapts back to life, but is haunted by the idea of remembering Rhea wrong. Next, we see Chris preparing food in the kitchen and accidentally cuts his finger. He washes it under a tap, but as he rubs his finger, it miraculously heals. He turns and stares at a picture of Rhea. Suddenly, Chris is back on the space station, still staring out of the window and unable to leave. He lets the pod depart and takes off his helmet. The space station is pulled deeper into Solaris as Chris cries out for Rhea and falls over while holding his ears, screaming as a hissing sound increases in intensity. Snow stares up into a light in awe. Jabarian's son holds out his hand to Chris, to which he receives. Back in Chris's kitchen, he hears Rhea's voice. He slowly approaches her and asks if he is alive or dead. Rhea replies they don't have to think like that anymore, that they are together, and everything that they have done is forgiven. They kiss and embrace as we see Solaris floating in the cosmos.
See.
Now you've seen it, please like and subscribe. And remember kids, if you wake up next to an alien disguised as your dead wife, you should wear protection.